It's the last week of August, which means we're just a few days away from the arrival of September baseball. It's the first time in 10 years in Milwaukee that we won't see Craig Tember, Pat Tember, I don't know, doesn't quite have the same ring to it. Murph Tember, maybe. We'll see, but there aren't the 40-man rosters like we used to see in September. It's been a few years now since they made that change. Instead, you're allowed to add one pitcher and one hitter to your roster. So who should the Brewers add to their roster to take advantage of those two extra spots as they fight for one of the top spots in the National League and look to clinch the NL Central, maybe even in the first half of September? Well, there are a few candidates to take those roles. The first two guys are probably names you've been hearing about from AAA Nashville, Jacob Mizorowski and Craig Yoho. The two of them are both dominating AAA Nashville in the bullpen, and they could be big arms that make an impact in the pennant race. I spent a recent video breaking down why or why not the Brewers should call up Mizorowski or Yoho. So take a look at that previous video for a more in-depth discussion of whether I think they should call up one of the two prospects. They have a few more options in the bullpen. They could activate Hobie Milner or Enoli Paredes, or they could recall Elvis Peguero, who's been in AAA since being sent down to make room for Trevor McGill on the IL. Peguero has thrown two scoreless innings so far, two scoreless outings in AAA Nashville, and he's really not a AAA arm. We all know he's a big league arm, had a 3 ERA pitching out of the Brewers bullpen in the majors, really just got squeezed out because of an unfortunate roster situation. He's a major league arm pitching in the AAA bullpen. Hobie Milner is a major league arm, as is Enoli Paredes. Hobie Milner had a 4.92 ERA before he was placed on the IL with a shoulder issue, and the shoulder issue is probably pretty minor. He said he deals with things like that from time to time, but they decided to put him on the IL to clear some room. Enoli Paredes had a 1.08 ERA before being placed on the IL on July 3rd. Paredes doesn't have the track record that Hobie does. Hobie has been pretty good for a few years now, although Paredes has had more success to this point. Hobie, even though he had a 4.92 ERA, the underlying numbers paint a better picture. The strikeout numbers are still kind of on par with where they were last year. The walk numbers are right there. The expected ERA by StatCast, based on quality of contact, shows that his expected ERA is 3.32. So he really has had a much better year than the ERA would indicate, whereas Paredes is a little bit more of the opposite. So maybe he hasn't quite had the year that he has 16 2/3 innings, 2 earned runs, but the strikeout numbers are pretty low and the walk numbers are pretty high. So the Brewers could choose to bring back either of those two. They could choose to recall Peguero. Another arm that could factor back in, I know they just placed him on the IL, but Nick Mears, who's been struggling so far in his early time in a Brewers uniform, he's not eligible to come back already on September 1st, but he would be eligible to come back about a week later. So the Brewers could bring back Mears at that point. On the offensive side, they could call up Tyler Black, who we've seen multiple times in a Brewers uniform this year. The positional versatility makes it a little bit challenging for Black. He's a primary first baseman at this point, and this year he spent some time at first base, third base, left field, and center field in AAA. The Brewers don't really need more outfielders right now, but they could maneuver the positions around a little bit to try to make some room for Black in the outfield. I think the better fit for him, though, is at first base or third base. It's a little bit more challenging right now with Hoskins playing as well as he has in the second half, because you want Hoskins' bat in the lineup every day. Gary Sanchez is playing well as well, and he's a guy that you want in there at least some of the time at DH, as well as some of the guys that they've been filing in at the DH position. So there's not a ton of room for Black, especially with Jake Bauers playing pretty well in a backup role at first base. And there's Brewer Hicklin, who's an outfielder who has had a very good year. He has very little major league experience, but this year he has 41 steals at this point, hitting 249, 366 on base, slugging up close to 500, 19 home runs at the time of this recording. So he's having an excellent year, mostly played the outfield corners, but can play center field. I think if the Brewers are going to call up Brewer Hicklin, though, they're going to need to have Sal Frelick play some third base, because there's not really room for at-bats for Churio, who needs to be playing every day, Garrett Mitchell, who they have been playing most days. And if you want to get Mitchell going, I know he struggled lately, but if you want to get him going, you're going to need to get him more at-bats, considering the amount of at-bats he's missed over the past 2 years. They've got Blake Perkins in the outfield, of course. Jake Bauers has played some in the outfield. And then Hicklin would add another player into that mix. So I think if you're going to do that, you need to have Frelick play more at third base. But the Brewers do really like Hicklin, I've heard. So it's possible we see them give him a look late in the year, kind of similar to what they did with Blake Perkins, and then maybe next year he would have an increased role. Not a big prospect. They signed him to a minor league deal this year. He's 28 years old, or almost 28. So he's someone that could have a future with the Brewers, but probably not maybe as a starter, but maybe a part-time role. So the Brewers could choose to go with Black or Hicklin. Those are really the two main options. They already have 3 catchers on the roster with Haas and Sanchez, so they're not going to bring up someone else. Vinny Capra maybe, but that's more if they want to replace Monasterio, who struggled throughout the year offensively. So Black and Hicklin, the two main options to get September call-ups on the position player side. On the pitcher side, Elvis Peguero is someone who could be recalled, or maybe Hobie Milner or Noli Paredes get activated off the IL. Jacob Mizorowski and Craig Yoho, those are going to be the sexy options, but I'm not 100% sure if the Brewers will choose to do that. And again, if you want to find more analysis about that, go refer to one of my previous videos that I made last week about whether the Brewers should call up Mizorowski and Yoho. Maybe the Brewers will surprise me and they'll call up someone else, but those are the prime candidates I see being September call-ups for the Brewers this upcoming week.